Something game design is my passion or somebody's passion at IS, cause oh boy, there sure are a lot of things in this game that make me question their thought process at times. I've talked extensively before about many of the things IS changed about the game over the course of who knows how long, but one topic I've never really delved into as much were the maps. You know, one of the most important things when it comes to the game itself. The maps. With nearly 8 years of Heroes under their belt, there's a litany of maps scattered across the game that can range from good to bad to who greenlit this in the first place. And occasionally we'll still get new maps that make me wonder why they were designed in the way they were. That's not often the case these days due to how structured a lot of their design philosophy is now, but that doesn't mean there's nothing to talk about. Far from it, because Fire Emblem Heroes maps are kinda weird. Did you like the title reference? And this can be seen right from the outset of the game. That will be covered right after today's sponsor. Thanks to Tokyo Treat for sponsoring today's video. Hi guys, Z here. Do y'all ever get tired of the boring, mundane snacks that you have lying around your house? Do you want something new to spice up your life? How about something from Japan? Whoa, you could do that? You could get stuff from Japan? That's crazy. Why, yes, you can, thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakura Box. Actually, I don't really like to have snacks around my place, but maybe you would if you had access to good snacks. Like from these companies, Tokyo Treat and Sakura Box offer monthly services that have fun and exclusive stuff all shoved into one convenient Japanese snack box. This can range from candies to chips and whatever else may be classified as a snack. I only know those two, because those are the only two I tend to eat. If it's something of that kind, it probably exists in either of these services. And don't fret about the language barriers, because each box comes with a pamphlet, look, pamphlet, describing all of the treats put into each monthly box. You could always make it a guessing game if you don't really want to read it though, but if you want to know what you're putting into your body, then this will help you. They pack a lot of goodies in each box every month, so you won't necessarily be starved for options, and every single month they always come out with new types of goodies to put in, so it's not always going to be the same thing every single time. Because of this, there's bound to be something in there that you'll like, or maybe somebody in your family will like, or maybe your dog will like it if they can eat it. But I bet they can, because these boxes only contain the finest of snacks. Unless it's chocolate, because they still can't eat that. Not sold on it yet? Here's some testimony from real legit people that are in fact real and legit. This product is awesome and from Japan, which makes it awesome.
Hey, I was told I would get paid if I said it was good. I love product. Sure do. Yum, yum, yum.
Oh, you want to know my thoughts on it? Of course you do. I like the boxes because it means I don't have to go a significant amount of time without eating, especially when I'm too lazy to make a meal. But also the variety is pretty cool. Okay, so I do have the actual boxes right here, and they do have a lot of really cool stuff in it. Looks like to be gummies, and I mean, that one says Kit Kat, so it's probably a Kit Kat, and some other stuff there, which seems pretty cool. But red packaging means I want to try red packaging first, so probably going to do that. I know you guys can't really see my face or anything like that, but yeah, no, it tastes pretty decent. It's very strawberry. Very strawberry. I've also never really had a Kit Kat in my life, so you know what? Why not? No, Kit Kat's not so bad. It's not bad. There's a lot of stuff in here that I'm probably going to try at a later date just because I don't really want to spoil my appetite right now. But yeah, no, they're pretty good so far. There's probably maybe something I may not like in there, but so far so good. Why not give it a shot by using the link in the description and get started today? It can make for a nice festive gift or something for the upcoming holidays, assuming it's still the holidays, but every day is a holiday with Tokyo Treat and Sakura Box. Use code ZShadow or the link below at Tokyo Treat or Sakura Box to receive $5 off your first order. You'll probably enjoy it. Thanks again to Tokyo Treat for sponsoring today's video. The first year of Fae is where a lot of maps felt all over the place in terms of quality, but considering it was the very beginning of the game, and they most likely didn't have a structure for pretty much anything going on, it was passable. Most of the maps that you would find in the game were directly taken from mainline entries, and depending on the size of the original map and how it was designed, it either made for a neat little reference, or one of the worst maps to ever play. It was very much an aesthetic over practicality thing since they were meant to bring homage to the source material. This would also include paralogue maps that couldn't fit into the main story maps but functioned practically the same, all references to pre-existing mainline maps, units, so on and so forth, but not including the seasonal maps that were fully original, but more on that later. It's why there are a fair bit of new heroes roaming around in that section of the game instead of the main story, where all of the new hero banner units reside these days. ways. The homage and references would also extend into the types of units you would fight, whether it was a Lance Cav unit from Ike's Chapter 8-5 map to reference Oscar, or Walt and the Christmas Cavs on the first Binding Blade map. And this could be seen a fair bit throughout Book 1's maps, and most likely subside after they stop directly using mainline maps for the story maps, barring potentially Book 4's 3 Houses CYL maps that use specific generic types to fill in for all of the students. The amount of original maps that were seen in the story maps came from the every so often story map that directly involved characters like Veronica and Xander, or the one-time playable preface maps that were basically just tutorial maps that explained the basics of the game. And fun fact, the original unit you used in that map was Virion, but he would be replaced by Takumi after version 2.5. It was after Book 1 where anything related directly to map references were saved for other types of maps, and most of the maps following Book 1 were fully original, and in many ways were built around the idea of teaching you how new units worked, as well as having the story itself play a role in how the maps were made. This could include having a survive map objective against an invincible Surtur, or a fell version of Asker, which includes all sorts of familiar scenery, a Freya defense map with dozens of her clones, or a single unit that broke into your home screen. Sometimes the maps would have subtle stuff baked into the design of the maps that would come up at a later point in time, like the Yggdrasil roots found all over some of the maps. These things that were played off as an aesthetic at the time served to be something much grander over time, although I'm not sure if this was their intention from the get-go or not. Regardless, the amount of story integration that bleeds into the maps these days had made story maps a lot more interesting. That said, Book 1 was a fair bit better than it's probably being let on right now. There were still map objectives that kept some of the repeat maps interesting because they added objectives such as survive with an indefinite amount of reinforcements or routing within a certain turn limit. Some units on these types of maps would also come with seals that prevented them from taking damage to prolong the map as long as they felt necessary, and wouldn't move until a certain point for difficulty's sake. And there were also maps that felt interesting, quote unquote, for the wrong reasons due to newly released game mechanics. Around May of 2017, they introduced defensive terrain, which boosted a unit's defense and res by 30% when standing on it. It was originally made for arena purposes, but it found its way into the story maps too, and when they introduced a new mechanic into the game, they want you to be fully aware of its existence. It's why chapter maps such as 11 and 12 were spammed with defense tiles at the time, and also led to one of the first of many difficulties that came with completing some of the content in the game, such as the chain challenge. Although it didn't help that it cost 25 stamina for the highest difficulty maps with a cap total of 50, essentially limiting your total tries to 2 for a pretty long while. This was an issue for arena maps as well and other types of mechanics that would release over the course of the game, but more on that later. Paralogue maps weren't that much different for the most part, at least when it came to the new hero maps. As mentioned prior, anything that couldn't fit within the main story section was tossed into the Paralogue section, which mostly included new hero banner maps. However, this might have been in part due to how short Book 1 was overall. All books started around the beginning of December and lasted until the end of the following November, whereas Book 1 started in the middle of February. This most likely wouldn't have happened if not for the original delay of the game, since it was slated to release back in December of 2016, and because they stuck with their 13 chapter structure, many of the new heroes were tossed into the Paralogues, but the maps were basically functioning in the same way as basically all the main story ones that were just direct references. That said, this was the extent of its reference material, as most of Book 1's original map design was found within the Paralogues through seasonal maps, and similarly, it also has a heavy leaning in its aesthetic more so than its practicality, because for all of the maps that were designed around a specific seasonal theme, you would sometimes end up with maps that were like this, kind of practical, or designed like this, which were not practical. This might have been due to the defensive terrain edition that ended up bleeding into many of the maps, similarly to that of the main story maps. However, this would be one of, if not the only times where a new mechanic would be pushed this hard, regardless of the quality. Not even when trenches were introduced in the Fade due to the dominance of cavalry at the time, which actually is a fun bit of trivia to that. Trenches have predominantly been locked to arena modes, with some Aether Raids maps here and there, unlike defense tiles that were basically spewed everywhere. As of the timing of this video, there are no trench tiles that exist in any of the main story maps. However, there are a total of 3 Paralogue maps that have trenches, which includes Paralogues 34-2, 81-2, and 81-3. 81-2 and 81-3 have them to show off units that negate the tile itself, so it makes sense that they were present, but they don't serve any purpose in 34-2, so my assumption is that it was made to prevent your own cavalry from running in, but it's hard to say. Regardless, the maps were much more original at least, but many of them being impractical to navigate through at times. That said, after book 1, most of the map design would follow in the main story steps, where maps were designed around the new units and skills while remaining mostly original. As for what qualified as a paralogue map, however, this would mostly be established after book 3, barring the one-time Tokyo Mirage Sessions banner, when they started following the release structure of 1 new heroes, 1 new seasonal, and end of the month legendary, mythic, or emblem banner for each month. The main story still had that issue where the new banners that couldn't fit into the main story were thrown into the paralogue section, but it was significantly reduced from book 1. This mostly included Brave Hero banners that were never originally found in the main story maps as they are now, Farfetched and Redux Hero banners, and the one-off Adrift banner, as well as the occasional Xenologue map. The only banner from this mix that still directly referenced specific maps was the Adrift banner that consisted of miniature versions of Vala maps from Fates. Everything else was still fully original and still followed the design philosophy of being made around new units and skills. That said, there was only one seasonal banner that designed their maps based on pre-existing material, and that was the Performing Arts 2017 banner. All 3 of the maps were in reference to Fire Emblem Fates' Dark Reunion map, or I guess Voice of Paradise depending on the version. You know, the one Gun Garen chapter basically. Every other seasonal theme had fully original maps, and it will most likely remain that way for the rest of the game's lifespan. Also, unrelated to the topic, but I wanted to include this map title somewhere in the video, and I had no idea where to do that, so here you go, we can move on to special maps now. Special maps are basically the home to one-off maps and other miscellaneous maps that wouldn't really fit in any other setting. These maps are special, quote-unquote, because outside of the rotating training maps, none of them cost any stamina to enter, although they did at one point. This is also where most of the free units reside, aka your Grand Hero battles. Most of the maps they find themselves in are directly designed around the map they show up in their original game. Grand Hero battle maps do keep up the aesthetic and reference material while also being practical to navigate. Unless it's Veld's map, which is not only a reference to the final Thracia 776 map, but also ridiculous to move around in, so much so that I might have to apologize for what I said about that one Nino and Raven map. That's really the only outlier though, and it still keeps the reference material, so it's fine enough. There are 12 other hero maps that show up in the daily rotation of maps, but they're from the beginning of Fae where 1 and 2 star rarity was a thing. These maps were surprisingly wholly original, but a lot of them were also really bad. Like, really bad. Like, really, really bad. You also have the aforementioned training maps that were designed to get units trained in the most efficient way possible. All of the enemies that show up are extremely weak, and they're plentiful too, so you don't have to spend nearly as much stamina getting those units trained up. That said, there are a few things worth highlighting about these maps. Prior to the addition of these maps, one of the best ways to grind out a unit for SP was through a limited time FE Warriors Camilla map that had 2 choke points attached to them. The idea was that you unequipped weapons from your bulkiest units and had them block off the choke point so that your more squishy units can farm off the foes. Because of that, this was considered the best SP grinding method at the time, but a lot of the philosophy of the map would bleed into how many perceive the current SP grinding maps. There are a total of 5 SP maps that rotate in and out each day, and the idea is that they are designed around certain unit types such as melee, range, bows, magic, and an anything goes type map. The problem with many of these maps, however, is that they will litter units that are purposely strong against the unit type that it's supposed to favor, which makes it completely antithetical in design even if they are weak by nature. Because of this, one of the most highly regarded training maps, regardless of the weapon type, is the ranged map because of the choke point in the middle alongside how enemies spawn. All of the other maps have enemies spawn sporadically, whereas the ranged map has them all clustered towards the right side of the map, making it so you can have the unit you're training occupy the choke point and siphon all the SP and XP necessary while receiving any support from the back. This, coupled with other additions such as the distant counter seal, means it's the most opportune and effective way to grind out most units in the game, but because it only shows up every 5 days, you'll most likely have to put up with the other maps. There are other maps that show up every so often with weird enemy choices, but that mostly extends into legendary, mythic, and emblem hero battle maps, and the skills some of them will show up with. The maps themselves also serve the same purpose and idea as the Grand Hero battle maps, being in reference to any of the source material, usually with the main unit being there and equipped with good skills and seals, but every so often you'll find a poorly made enemy with skills that simply don't function, either because the devs thought it was funny, which it is, or some other reason, but I think it's because it was really funny, and that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Otherwise, the maps themselves are fine enough for the most part. Special maps don't tend to hold much else besides the weekly rival domains that has interchanging maps that are larger than the average Fey map. These maps are designed with capturing zones and placed under a 10-turn limit, and they change every single week, so you'll naturally come across plenty of maps that fit the bill or are out of pocket, and to my knowledge, they've never repeated any of the maps before. But with how long this has been going on, having well over 300 maps, it's really hard to say. At one point, they also had an anniversary map for Fire Emblem's 30th anniversary, which had a pixelated recreation of Chapter 1-1, as well as an April Fool's map event based on the Asker training video released back in 2023, which was also based on Lumera's Grand Hero battle map. The former gave you pixel art accessories of Alphonse, Sharena, and Anna, while the latter gave you a load of stamina potions, which was also pretty helpful. There was also Relay Defense that was a short-lived mode that played in the opposite way of rival domains. Rather than attempting to capture zones, you had to defend them. This mode only gave you pain, and it only lasted 2 events. There's also the Training Tower, which is a culmination of most maps from the main story in Paralogue Maps. Normally, I wouldn't highlight stuff like this since it's essentially treading the same stuff, but there are a couple notable things about it. The maps that show up are rehashed from the main story in Paralogues, but they will always spawn a different assortment of units and skills depending on the stratum chosen. However, some units are excluded from showing up, usually because IS arbitrarily decided that would be the best thing to do, or because they were dancers, or somebody like Surtur, and whatever else may fall into that category, which is really funny when newer, more obnoxious threats are able to show up instead. Some of the maps that also show up have hard-coded unit types, skills, and AI behaviors. For example, the Sacred Stones map will have a flyer slotted in place of what would have otherwise been Tana in the Paralogue, and also come with Guidance 3 if the stratum permits it. There's also the Book 2 route map where none of the AI will move unless initiated on or put into range of a foe, and this applies to every single foe on the field. Most of these properties are carried over from their original iteration and then applied accordingly to the units deployed, which makes me think this isn't an individual unit case scenario but a map one. There's also certain maps that will only show up depending on the amount of units that can be deployed, such as 3-unit maps, 4-unit maps, and 5-unit maps. From my understanding, you can't have a greater total of units show up on maps designed around having a maximum that is set to less, but it doesn't apply inversely. So you could have a Training Tower map shuffled in that has less units than intended, such as 3 units on a 4-unit map. And again, I probably wouldn't have mentioned this, but there are properties to the maps and stuff worth talking about, whereas something like Blessed Gardens or Squad Assaults or even Forging Bonds and Tempest Trials are equivalent to that of Chain Challenges, barring the double SP modifier found in the last 2. And speaking of interesting things worth talking about in the video, Aether Raids. Aether Raids is essentially the custom map editor mode within the scope of being given preset maps that you can fill units and structures with. This can range from desert maps with mountains to an open field to whatever the hell this is. There's roughly 18 maps to choose from that all have variations from one another, which keeps the prospect of building teams much more interesting. As for the teams you might run into, that will vary. Because the game is constantly adding new types of units and effects into the game, the types of teams you'll run into will change over a period of time to align with what's best in the meta. Some stuff tends to stick around, whether it's due to old meta teams not being updated, such as Catria balls, or for the sake of resource convenience like Cavlines, but many of the patterns between most types of maps is that they tend to prioritize threat range. That said, it's really hard to generalize Aether Raids maps as a whole because there's a lot of units and effects that have been added, making for all sorts of team combinations. There's also additions and changes that call for teams to adapt as a result, whether that's a safety fence, which gives the attacking player the ability to shut off the foe's actions, now up to 2 turns because of the recent upgrade, or the calling circle that now allows for teams to deploy 1 extra unit. Hell, they'll occasionally change maps if they feel like they need to do that. One map got nerfed due to 2 of the unbreakable blocks it had. They were turned into breakable blocks after a patch, and less people started using them as a result. That said, most of what Aether Raids maps entail will vary throughout various metas, and with how many people have uploaded various Aether Raids replays to YouTube over the years, there's a very high likelihood that you could pinpoint the common types of defenses that were around certain points of the game. I also had no idea where to fit this, but when you first enter the mode, you'll enter a tutorial. This has a tutorial map to reel you into the game, which, fun facts, I think facts, I'm going to say facts, the name that is set is beyond the in-game names functionality since it has more than 12 characters, and you could lose in the tutorial map because the game lets you surrender against it. Figured it was worth mentioning. You also have arena in arena mode such as arena because it's in, you guessed it, the Coliseum. Arena has gone through a load of changes over the course of the game, whether that was score-related changes, bonuses, retreats, and maps were basically no different. A lot of the arena maps that are present nowadays weren't always the same maps from the beginning. Many of them were scrapped either due to how poorly they were designed, or maybe no other reason. It was most likely just that. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but when defensive terrain and trenches were released, IS wanted you to know they existed, so they came up with maps such as these. Granted, some of the scrap maps didn't always have those features, but they were most likely scrapped in part due to the set positions of both teams. Many of the maps had them facing each other horizontally instead of vertically, which meant that you had way less wiggle room to navigate around before getting jumped by the enemy team. Some maps had it so any ranged cav could immediately swing onto your team, or made navigating around tedious, or heavily favored one specific movement type, which is almost likely the reason why they were scrapped to begin with. A lot of the early day maps can still be seen in Arena and Arena Assault, but we also have a bunch of new maps to cycle around seasons. And with the quality of life updates that were added over time, including the ability to lose units and less matches required to hit max score, it makes the process of scoring in each mode a lot less frustrating. Even more so when playing Arena Assault because you can counterpick each team and suspend a run whenever you feel like it. There's also Resonance Battles, which is a route objective mode with the indefinite time limit. The map design itself remains consistent in most cases due to there only being 10 total maps, but the difficulty will range depending on the types of units that can show up each season. This will mostly vary by the types of bonuses that each season has, but some will naturally be harder than others due to the timing of their release, such as Engage being harder due to most of their units being modern, and Awakening being easier due to the plethora of old units that existed since the launch of the game. That said, the objective is still to get all the thieves before they escape, but to get to them, you usually have to take care of the bonus units who can fight back. They all also have a skill that prevents you from running past them unless it's a warp effect, which is why the difficulty fluctuates. Fun fact, this mode used to have limited attempts before they scrapped that altogether, which was for the best. And of course, there's Allegiance Battles, which basically follows the same formula to that of Resonance Battles, except it's a fully route map instead of Thief only. There are 10 maps to cycle through, and the units that appear will depend on that respective week, so it can be really easy or really hard depending on the bonus. However, unlike Resonance Battles, your score will be based on the type of unit you take kills with, as defeating a foe with a weapon triangle advantage will net you more points. There are other score factors like quest bonus that relies on friend units, as well as synergy, which is based on the amount of times you participate in the mode. And fun fact, to get full synergy bonus in Allegiance Battles, you must wait over 3 years because it's a bi-weekly event. Maybe that's not fun actually. There's another arena mode, although I'd hardly call it an arena mode despite it being in the Coliseum, in Summoner Duels. Summoner Duels is very much intended as the endgame game mode since it's a culmination of all the strongest stuff in the game poured into one single mode. But also it's PvP, so that probably should get that across. The goal is either ending the match with the most amount of points or defeating every foe on the enemy team. The complexity of it comes from the rotating maps and skills that people have to adjust for each season, on top of newly released units and skills. This on top of the mode's Captain Skill mechanic, which are additional effects that can be applied to units and foes that also cycle in and out each season, plays another role in it. It's well designed for the most part, but it being built on the foundation of gacha makes it very cutthroat and centralizing as a result. The maps themselves being cycled through with an arrangement of captain skills keeps it all the more interesting because the same map may not be played in the same way as a result of the skills that season. But even beyond that, there's a total of 21 maps, so there will always be some kind of variety. Moreover, none of the maps feature any sort of defensive terrain, which is most likely done for balance purposes, and all of the maps are mirrored so that whatever side you stand on will always have the same amount of tiles present. Some maps did have to get reworked on the point of balance since one of the maps had both teams face each other vertically and arguably really poor tile placement, and another map was basically just an open field. Some captain skills were also reworked and removed for balance purposes, such as Erosion, which went from a mostly useless armor counter to a complete armor killer, and Quick Draw, which was removed because it not only removed turns from the opponent but also allowed you to take first action no matter what, which was really poorly made. Otherwise, much of the mode is made up of units that you have yourself, which is why it's an endgame mode. The map maps themselves, as well as the captain skills, serve as a base akin to many Aether Raids maps, but with more dramatic and constant shifts. Similarly, it's hard to generalize it due to how open-natured the mode is, and we'll continue to see shifts in the meta, so nothing is really set in stone. I wouldn't go on record saying it's a balanced game mode, but mostly to the extent of the units and skills that get added over time, making some of the maps more frustrating as a result. Ideally, maps are set up to be even, especially in cases where starting first or second doesn't put you at a larger advantage, but it can end up lopsided due to updates to the game that make it favor the person who starts first instead. This is mostly isolated to favors in Summoner Duels R, since in Summoner Duels S you could choose to ban certain teams and effects, but with effects such as Gallop and Celica Ring roaming around, it ends up becoming a lot more prevalent, although this is something that I believe many maps fall victim to in general. To keep the game more interesting, they continually add new types of units and effects into the game without fully realizing the scope of what those effects entail. This could be with something such as Kanto, which originally debuted on Reagan, and not just one movement after the combat, a whole 3 tiles. This basically changed up how many interacted with Fae maps, and in a lot of ways broke them because there wasn't a solution for units being able to hit a unit or break a structure and then running away, peaking with units such as Yuri, until Medius in Book 6, who introduced an inheritable solution. Warping, while definitely not to the same extent, definitely got a massive boost when stuff such as Bridecatcher and Guidance Force skills came about because it let most units move around maps in ways that felt unpredictable at times. Celica's ring effect, also being fairly new, definitely pushed it to its limits because it doesn't show on the map until you're in range, so you have to do what people did in the older Fire Emblem titles and count those spaces manually. Terrains aren't too old either, but we get many new types of them every so often, and they change up a lot of how people play with the game, whether that's flame tiles that reduce movement from ranged units, ice terrain which puts up impassable terrain, or grass terrain that negates a unit from warping to tiles with that terrain active on it. They do add new maps every so often, which in my mind is also taking the aforementioned additions into account, but more often than not it becomes a matter of adapting. It's still worth keeping in mind that the average Fae map is very small, usually consisting of a 6x8 grid, excluding modes such as Summoner Duels and Rival Domains, so many of these effects end up way stronger as a result. There's most likely other effects that affect maps in comparable ways, but these are very much the highlights of that, and there's a strong chance that we'll see more of this over time. Otherwise, there's a few things that I wanted to bring up when it came to Fae maps that didn't really need its own section. There's the Voting Gauntlet event that happens at the end of each month, and they're also using pre-existing maps from a select amount of Book 1 maps in a 3v3 style, featuring one random player unit, your own unit, and a friend unit. They're basic route objectives, and they are filled with random units, usually consisting of player leads. However, the difficulty of each map will fluctuate depending on the rarity and level of the unit you deploy. For example, if you deploy a unit that's trained and 5-star, you'll run into tougher opponents, whereas deploying an untrained 3-star unit will net you weaker foes, which can make clearing the mode much easier if you have a friend with a powerful lead. There's also Ponzaloki, which is a 20-tile map that ignores movement types and mostly acts as a battle of attrition. The mode used to have it so your team was affected by all sorts of statuses such as Flash and Undefended that would show up, but they were removed after a patch because of the difficulty swing. However, the level system is widely all over the place, which can make units spawn at a significantly higher level with fully decked out kits and makes it essentially impossible to complete. It's all AI controlled too, so unless there are no more foes left, all your allies will swing onto a unit even if they will lose. This is probably the most RNG mode in the game, but with the added benefit of being able to use your friends' allies to help out. It's still really annoying though. And lastly, there's the tactic drill maps that are an extension of the tutorials the game makes you go through at the start. They exist to teach you the basics of new units and skills as well as specific interactions. It's very much a simple schematic barring Grandmaster maps that not only require specific actions to be made, but usually also have way more actions to boot. They are some of the most fun challenges in the game because the maps hinge on your ability to make calculated decisions. Excluding the early day ones where they were super ultra specific. I hate this map in particular and I always will. They also don't follow the basics of the game because sometimes you'll run into units with largely inflated BST, which is nigh impossible to achieve and will most likely remain impossible. but it got referenced in a Faye comic once. And other than that, that's really about it when it comes to Faye map design. There's a lot of history when it comes to them, and honestly, I find it really interesting for the most part. If you feel the same way, then let me know down below. And if you don't feel the same way, then let me know down below. If you want to see more content like this, and make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.